Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this week's National Bleeding Disorders Foundation, formerly National Hemophilia Foundation, Wednesday webinar. My name is Fiona Robinson, and I am the series host. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to the community on the NBDF website, bleeding.org, shortly after the webinar. In today's webinar, we will learn about bleeding disorder resources, referrals, and educational tools. We encourage you to ask any questions you may have today. You can ask your question by using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen at any time during the webinar. We will monitor these questions, and following our speakers' presentations, we will put your questions to them. Today, we are joined by two members of the National Bleeding Disorders Foundation Medical Programs and Information team, Jonathan Angarola, who is a Senior Manager, and Anna Laurent, who is a Medical Programs and Information Coordinator. I'd like to thank Jonathan and Anna for joining us today, and I will turn things over now to Jonathan to get us started.
Okay. Thank you, Fiona. So the title of today's presentation is NBDF's Information Resource Center Handy, Past and Present. And it's going to be readily apparent why we titled the presentation such very soon. I want to start out with our mission here. So NBDF is dedicated to finding the cures of inheritable blood and bleeding disorders and to addressing and preventing the complications of those disorders through research, education, advocacy, enabling people and families to thrive. And you can go to the next slide, Fiona. Thank you. So this is just a brief intro to Handy. We're going to dive much deeper very soon, but we can start off by saying Handy functions within the Medical Programs and Information Department. And we serve our patrons by connecting them to resources, providing referrals, and generating medical news updates and additional content through NBDF's communication channels. And we've been operating for more than 30 years, which is really hard to believe. And we also are constantly evolving. I think Handy will only stay relevant and be of value to this community if we continue to evolve. And that'll be a recurrent theme going throughout this presentation. You can go to the next slide, Fiona. Okay, so obviously we have Anna Laurent, who will be joining us, obviously. You'll hear from her very soon. You're gonna get the pleasure of hearing me for the next few minutes. And we also want to acknowledge the third member of our team, Angelina Wong. So Angie is not part of this presentation today, but she is a key member of the Handy team. Her vast experience, her knowledge base is very deep, and she has great insights, and she is like a crucial member to this team. She may be on the call right now, so hi, Angie, if you are. But I just wanted to acknowledge that. And Anna, like I said, you'll hear from soon. Anna is amazing. She's whip smart, poised, and generally lovely. So you're going to get to hear from her soon. So. Oh, and I should also say, we call this the Handy team, but honestly, yes, we do a lot of work in Handy, but we wear other hats outside of Handy. We have other roles and responsibilities Handy-wise. So yes, so Handy through the decades. So this is a great opportunity. I don't think we've gotten a chance to talk about Handy history that often. So this will be really nice. I think folks will learn a lot. This is not meant to be a deep dive necessarily, but it gives you a snapshot of what was going on in the decades, the last 3+ decades. So you can go. Okay, so the 1990s, this was obviously these were the early years of Handy. We were really born out of the HIV crisis. Folks were desperate for information, and they had acute informational needs, and Handy was established to fill that need. You can see our acronym here. Some people know it. I'm sure some people on the call know it. We always tease some of our fellow staff members if they can remember the acronym, but it's the Hemophilia AIDS HIV Network for the Dissemination of Information. No, it does not roll off the tongue, but you know, it's important. It's our brand. It's a brand that is familiar to a lot of the community, not to all the community. But we have stuck with it, and it's also a nod to our origins. So, so we think that's important. You can see on the left here the first newsletter that went out announcing Handy's launching. So you can see that was the spring of 1990. So this is where it all started. In terms of common requests at that time, this probably won't be a surprise considering the context, but we received a lot of questions relevant to HIV testing and risk reduction, treatment, clinical trials, legal settlements, including the Ricky Ray compensation, and inquiries about psychosocial support for individuals and families affected by HIV/AIDS. That's not surprising. It was an extremely stressful time. So those kinds of requests came in quite often. And at this time, Handy had to be built from scratch, basically from the ground up. Fortunately, we got federal funding from the Office of Maternal and Child Health. So that was a big deal. I don't think we would have gotten off the ground without that. And then we had to build a library, not only a library, but a catalog, not only a catalog, but a controlled vocabulary that spoke to that catalog. So this was a considerable lift. We also had to establish resource distribution channels. We just remember this is, early 90s, pre-internet. Well, it wasn't the internet existed, but it really wasn't it wasn't used prominently until probably the latter half of the decade. So that was a considerable effort as well. We're talking all paper and the phone, which we'll get into the phone work in a second. And I also want to take this opportunity to acknowledge what I call the Handy pioneers. So these are the folks that got Handy up and running. So those original librarians and information specialists who were having to build this library from scratch, as I said, and doing it under, I won't say duress, but information was changing rapidly about treatment and screening and all of that, clinical trials. So the staff at that time were doing, amazing work. And I just want to shout out, I don't know if any of them are on the call today, but I think it's important to acknowledge their hard work. And at the time, majority of RFIs requests came in by phone. This is, early 90s. And that phone was rarely on the hook, so to speak. And you could jump to the next slide, Fiona. So I thought this was cool. We had cleaned out our offices recently at the national office, or our former national office. And I found this old Rolodex card, which I just thought was really cool. It's very vintage. It's probably printed in 1990. You'll see our old address there, 110 Green Street, our plucky little nonprofit in a very posh neighborhood of Soho. A posh, artsy neighborhood. Yeah, it was great. We may have been in a posh neighborhood, but when you visited the offices, it was clear we were a nonprofit. And also you'll see a phone number, you'll see a fax, but you will not see an email. So again, to that point, phone calls were king back in the early 90s. Okay, Fiona, you can jump ahead. So in the 2000s, it really became about shifting. The community was shifting and their informational needs really expanding. So folks needing more information on more topics, and Handy had to expand its wheelhouse in response. So, our library had to encompass a lot more, and a lot of those topics were quality of life type requests. So trends for this decade were prophylaxis, particularly prophylaxis with factor replacement products, requests related to education and awareness. So that's information that would be used in schools, in daycares, for in-services, and things like that. Joint health was also a hot topic, and wellness kind of came to the fore. There were a lot of requests relevant to wellness, and that would include vitamins, supplements, nutrition, and things like that. Physical activity was also a hot topic in the 2000s. I mean, it still is, but there were a lot of requests back then relevant to physical therapy, exercise, sports, what's safe, what's not safe, how can I make my joints stronger, and also from physical therapists who work in the community at HTCs, making requests for information. Also, requests relevant to women, girls, and people with a propensity to menstruate. So I think we saw this uptick because at the time, at the NHF at the time, had some pretty effective outreach campaigns going on, and we started to see an uptick in requests for this, classically underserved population. So that was really great. At the time, we also handy produced publications and distributed publications to support lots of regional and national conferences. We did a lot of that back then. And in this decade, it's the first time email became more prominent than phone calls as a way to submit an RFI. We still got phone calls, obviously, but at some point, probably around mid 2000, we saw major shifts. So at one point, we'd be getting 2 emails versus per 1 phone call. So that was a big shift as well. Okay, Fiona, you can move over. So the 2010s, big period of transition. So as you can imagine, I've been talking about resources, books, and paper-based hard copy resources. So at this point, when we get into the 2010s, you picture rows and rows of shelving, 7-8 feet high of resources, rows and rows of filing cabinets of hard copy resources. And something had to give at this point. So we underwent a big conversion. Not a religious conversion. I realize how that sounds, but we're converting our resources. So basically, we had to go through more than 13,000 resources, and we had to put them through a catalog review and a scanning process. The hardest part of this was not the scanning, because admittedly, we outsourced that, but the catalog review was challenging because we had to go through every single one of these resources and make sure they had the proper call number, unique ID before it went into the scanning hopper, so to speak. So it was a big lift, but definitely worth it because you're only one fire or one flood away from losing all this great content, and we're talking information of archival and historic value. So it was a big deal, and we were very relieved when we got it done. As far as trends, we saw a lot of requests, inhibitor-related requests, related obviously to factor replacement therapy, financial needs, and we continue to get these, and I can vouch for that. Folks with, various financial needs. So that could be help with co-pays, co-insurance, utility bills, and things of that nature. So unfortunately, there's still a lot of need out there, and we still get those requests. Insurance issues, we get those requests, or those requests became more prominent in the 2010s. As the decade went on, though, I would say we saw a drop off in insurance-related requests, which I would say you could probably attribute that to a couple things. Probably the good work of the social workers at the HTCs. They are super knowledgeable when it comes to insurance and reimbursement issues. Also, the Affordable Care Act was passed early in the decade, so that probably started to pay dividends as well. Travel needs, that was a big topic in this decade, international or domestic, folks traveling abroad or even within the country, and they just want to make sure they have their ducks in a row before traveling. And employment issues, it could be, possible workplace discrimination, or maybe, someone who just wants their employer and their colleagues to know more about their disorder. And social media. So social media was around in the 2000s, but in the 2010s, really rose to prominence. And this is where we started to see more and more requests, unofficial requests. I'm calling it unofficial because it didn't go through normal handy channels, but folks looking for, kind of throwing the line out there into social media and looking for an answer. So social media is great. It's keeps us connected, great way to share information, but it can be fraught because, you have sometimes medical advice being dispensed by non-medical professionals. It's rife for misinformation or information that's shared that's not applicable to a particular patient or family because, this is not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. Every individual is different, every patient is different, and every scenario is different. So you have to take that with a huge grain of salt. And we would just say, vet your information, consult your healthcare provider before you act on any information. And we know the majority of people know this, but we still feel like we need to say it. So forgive our little PSA there, but we just felt like we needed to say it. So you can go ahead, Fiona. So 2020, we're obviously still in the middle of this decade, not even halfway through, but we wanted to get into it a little bit here. So this is when we had to pivot to COVID. Before the pandemic, half the staff was worked remotely in other parts of the country, and half were the New York crew, the New York City crew, and that was where our department was. And we were used to, working, in person 5 days a week, and one day, this thing called COVID cases were going up, and we went home, and we thought we'd be home for 2 weeks, and you all know how that worked out. So it was a tough time. So it was kind of a culture shock for some of us who weren't used to working remotely. It was a real 100% virtual reality. So fortunately, we had done all that work in the previous decade to digitize our library. So that really paid dividends at this time. We felt a little better going home. If this is going to continue and we're going to be in quarantine for longer, that at least we have access to our resources without feeling like we were putting people at risk by going into the office. So the virtual environment actually, I think in a lot of ways is great. There are a lot of benefits to it. But obviously, we all value the face-to-face. So it's been nice in the last year or 2 years, I guess, being able to see our, affected individuals, families, providers, and our colleagues in person at places like the Bleeding Disorders Conference. As far as trends in the decade, obviously novel non-factor therapy and gene therapies is a very hot topic. They are, albeit less burdensome treatments, but they still come with a lot of questions. So, we hear from affected individuals and providers because, especially with gene therapies, there's a lot to chew on, so to speak, and there are just a lot of questions out there. Also, as patients, individuals with hemophilia and other bleeding disorders grow older in larger numbers, we're starting to see an uptick in request from this population. So we're talking cardiac surgeries, organ transplants, cancer, and orthopedic complications. Some of these are extremely complex requests and require, the patients themselves are looking to get up to speed, but also their providers, their surgeons, their primary care. So, as I said, these are very complex scenarios, but we're happy to help, wherever we can. We also saw an uptick in this decade in international requests related to immigration and other issues. Anna's going to talk about that very soon, but that we've definitely seen more of that. And vaccinations. This was in a finite period, but I wanted to acknowledge it here. In 2021, as COVID-19 vaccines became available, we started to hear from folks that we don't normally hear from, patients, particularly ones with rare bleeding disorders, but ones that skew on the more milder side, not super symptomatic, not folks that deal with severe symptoms, but they reached out to us because, the vaccinations had become available. They wanted to make sure, they had the information they needed, and it was really nice. It was really nice to connect with them. So we consider those great opportunities to share resources, what NBDF does, so workshops, educational publications, networking opportunities. So it was really nice, and we hope that it stuck for some of them, and they become, longtime members of the community. I mean, they are already members, but like active members where they're, attending conferences and staying involved. Yeah, I think that's all I got. Are we going to you, Anna?
Yeah, it's my
Okay.
turn.
Yeah.
So we really wanted, I know that's a lot of information. So we really wanted to give you all a visual to kind of just see a snapshot of that timeline. And so I want to address the big number at the top of the screen first. So we worked really hard to try to figure out the total number of RFIs that were fulfilled since Handy's inception. And I want to make it very clear that this is definitely underreported. And as Jonathan mentioned, that's for a number of reasons. That big one is that when Handy was created during the HIV crisis, right, it wasn't created to be a crisis center by any means, but it almost had to function that way given what was going on. And so because of that, and with the huge influx of requests that were coming in, there's no way of truly measuring how many requests they were fielding and getting. Jonathan's not kidding about the phone probably was not on the hook a majority of the time. And so moving beyond that though, and I'll cover this a little bit later, but like it's also difficult sometimes with just the varying ways of what we tracked and how we tracked and what the focus was during that time. And so that's why that number isn't completely accurate. We know that it's actually much higher. And so wanted to look at this timeline now and kind of put it in this way. So when Handy was created, right, during that HIV crisis, it was really reactive. Everyone was really having to be reactive given what was going on. And so that's not a great place to be. Obviously, that's not ideal. And so through the decades, Handy was able to really become more, not just reactive and be there for consumers in the moment of what they needed right then and there, but slowly get to become more proactive as that HIV crisis, as we got through that time, and as more resources and more information was established and not changing all the time, it really was able to become more proactive. So not only through the decades did we see all these different trends and this tech changing and Handy developing, we also see Handy getting to become more proactive, creating materials and kind of getting to switch from just one-on-one, here's a request, here's this individual's details, but really being able to kind of create some resources that are more general and can really assist more people. So just kind of wanted to put that out there and give you all more of a snapshot of the timeline. You can go ahead and advance the slide, Fiona. So we're going to talk about Handy now. So what are the most common RFIs that we get? So, and who contacts Handy? So basically everybody contacts Handy. But really, of course, it's mainly individuals who are diagnosed with bleeding disorders, as well as their family and friends and relatives that are related to them or in their life. Beyond that, it's also people who might suspect that they have a bleeding disorder and are looking into it and just trying to find a place to start and are really looking for a diagnosis. And then I'm saying it's mostly individuals. We also, I would say probably our next biggest one is really HTCs, and kind of the general public are the ones that we really hear from, as well as international community members. And I'll get more into that in detail here in a little bit. And so what are the types of requests that we get? So like I said, we really get a lot of newly diagnosed bleeding disorders. So really not knowing where to start after that first diagnosis. We have a lot of like school issues, transitionary times, right, for adolescents going through school, financial assistance. Jonathan mentioned that one. That one has kind of been a really consistent one we've always gotten through the decades. And unfortunately, I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon. And then, of course, women, girls, and people with a propensity to menstruate with bleeding disorders, rare bleeding disorders, a lot of product and treatment concerns, as well as, some of those aging aspects, with surgical concerns, dental, and things like that. And then, of course, research and literature on different topics is also something that we get reached out to. You can go ahead and advance the slide. So while we want to tell you what Handy does do, we want to tell you what we don't do. And so this first point is not just Handy, it's NBDF in general. We do not give medical advice or engage in medical practice. Not only just because that's kind of good policy anyway, but also because we know bleeding disorders vary so much from case to case. So really, it would be irresponsible for us to even try to say to this person and this person without knowing all the things and not being a medical professional to tell them what to do. So even though we're giving information and referrals, we always emphasize to make sure that people check in with their healthcare providers to make sure that's the best treatment for them, that's the best avenue, because we want to ensure that while we're giving information, we're not leading anyone to any direction that could potentially harm them and their quality of life. Now, something else that we do not do at Handy is provide direct and individual financial assistance. You will see here in a little bit that I'll mention a financial assistance programs list. I'll address that, but again, we do not give any direct or individual assistance. And then last but certainly not least, kind of an obvious one. We obviously don't share personal contact info for those who reach out to us, our patrons. That's not shared with anybody, even in our own handy team, unless someone is directly responding. We do not share names. We only share the details that are necessary. And so just want to put that out there. You can go ahead and advance the slide, please. So we're talking about information, we're talking about resources. What does that mean? So I know it's a long list. We really wanted to give you all an idea of what we're linking people to when they reach out to us. So it's kind of fall into 3 different buckets. The first one, of course, is resources, and that spans from everything from educational publications to journal articles to kind of more introductory resources like fact sheets to our wonderful MASAC, our Medical and Scientific Advisory Council documents, to even other parts of our organization that have things like STEP for a Living and things like that. So those are kind of a broad view of the different resources. There's no way to include a full list just because we do respond to individual requests. So there's no way to provide a cohesive list of all the things that we've provided because that would go on forever. Something we want to acknowledge is institutional knowledge. I am the newest member of the Medical Information and Programs team, but I want to acknowledge this because I myself have learned that not only Handy, but also the general staff at NBDF, we have some amazing long tenured staff. And with that comes this knowledge, not only of resources, not only of things like that, but also the community as a whole and how things have changed, what the community's been through. So that's really important and really a huge resource, not only for those that we serve, but also internally, especially for new people, really learning from those long tenured staff. We're able to, in my opinion, really assist our patrons even more so. And then, of course, referrals is a huge one. we are not meant to do it all. That's not what NBDF is meant to do, right? And so we refer, I would say probably our biggest ones are the HTCs and chapters. And then after that, it's the World Federation of Hemophilia, WFH. And as well as internally, we like to share the love with our other departments when we don't have the information. So we also refer internally as well within the organization. And then, of course, some of our referrals are also to organizations and things like that that are completely outside the bleeding disorder realm because, you know, holistic. We have other things going on in our patrons' lives than just their bleeding disorder. It impacts everything. So that can be crisis text line and things like that. If you want to advance the slide, please. So we're going to get into some requests and give you all some scenarios. So this is our first request that we're going to cover. And this request is from Grandma Susie. Again, all the names have been changed, the details have been changed. But Grandma Susie reaches out. She gives us a call and says that she feels that the family is really overwhelmed with a new diagnosis. It's one of her grandkids has been diagnosed and that they're struggling financially. And she just wants to collect all the information that she can to assist. So before I jump into what we provided Grandma Susie, I also want to let you know that this is not how we receive requests. That would be wonderful if we did receive requests this straightforward of exactly what they need and what's going on. But, you know, that's not how humans work, right? And so oftentimes when people come to us, they are either in crisis or they're having a very difficult time. And so because of that, oftentimes they either give us a whole lot of information that we don't need to know, or information that they don't give us a lot of information. And so as much as I would love that Grandma Susie would have sent me an email or given me a call and said, I need this, this, and this, that's not what happened, right? When I talked to Grandma Susie, she was overwhelmed. She was very upset. She's processing this diagnosis, not only for herself, but also for her grandchild and all of these things, and doesn't really know where to start. So while it maybe would have taken 10, 15 minutes to send her all these resources, that actually was like a 20 to 30-minute conversation with Grandma Susie because it's talking her through where to start and not just telling her about these resources, but giving her some of the terminology to use, which one to start with, and things like that. And actually, generally, Grandma Susie calls back about 2 days later after she's had some time to process things, and then we get to chat again. So just want to acknowledge that these requests do not come in like this. So let's jump into this image that we see. So I kind of created a type of like eco map spinoff to kind of give an example that when we give resources, we really try to be not only holistic, but also look at the different, we want to give resources on all levels. So not only local, right then and there where they're at, we want to meet them where they are, but also to where they have that chapter at the state level and they also have support at the national level. So we really want to make sure that we, when possible, right, we can't control local resources, but when possible, to really give that holistic approach and give those holistic resources that kind of span across the board. So first and foremost, we tell Grandma Susie all about HTCs and how amazing they are, right? Because a lot of times, if you were like me before I had this position, I did not know that HTCs had a social worker and kind of had all these things all in one, which is incredible. And if you don't know about that, you don't know that you can access it or how to access it. So talk to Grandma Susie about the HTC and how they have a social worker. Gave her the terminology, really how to ask, or how to tell her grandchild's parents how to ask for support. And then also let her know when we talk about that financial resource part, we really want to make sure they find out about local assistance. We, of course, do not have that knowledge. There's no way we could have that knowledge. And so part of that is also letting her know if that child's already enrolled in school, depending on their age, more than likely they either have a school counselor or a family resource center or both, which is phenomenal. And so I want to let Grandma Susie know those parents can reach out to that family resource center not only for like school supplies or things like that for the child, but also to find out about support for the family locally, as well as a school counselor with that mental emotional support as well for the child and the family. So those are in orange because those are not resources that come directly from NBDF. So after that, we always, about 9 times out of 10, connect people with their chapter. We know that community and connection is so incredibly important. And so that's almost a given in every request that we respond to is connecting them with their chapter if we know where they're located. And so that way, Grandma Susie knows there's another grandma she could probably talk to and other families that are going through what they've been through years down the line and kind of get to connect and have that going on. And then, of course, we're going to even get into a lot of these. But then, of course, we let Grandma Susie know about our publications that they can share with the school, they can use for themselves, that they can send to other family members who don't know what a bleeding disorder is and what that even means. And of course, MASAC documents, those are so incredibly important. We always make sure that our patrons know about those MASAC docs. And that financial resource list. So we have a list on our website that lists many financial assistance programs that do not go through us, but we have compiled that list for our community in order to have it kind of in one place to be able to find. And then last but certainly not least is we want to make sure that they know about different events that are happening from NBDF, again, for that connection, that education, and things like that. So that was our request scenario number 1 with good old Grandma Susie. If you want to move on for me, Fiona, that'd be great. So now we're going to talk about Zay. So Zay is an adult with hemophilia, and he's going to be moving to another state for a new job, and he does not know where to start in order to make sure there's a smooth transition with his medical care and his insurance. And once he gets settled in that new state, one of his priorities is to connect with his chapter and kind of build that community for himself. So there's 2 parts to this. Oftentimes, when people reach out, they don't tell us where they're moving, or they might not know yet. They just know they're going to move. And so that hinders us a little bit as to the detailed information we can provide. Okay, but we're going to make this an ideal scenario where Zay knows exactly where he's moving, knows the city, knows the state. And so in that case, what we do is we find out the contact information for that HTC that's going to be closest to him. And for those where they're kind of far away from a lot of them, we do give multiple HTCs so that they can choose which one that they want to try to go to. We then, while we're connecting Zay with that HTC, we make sure that he knows, talk to that social worker there, right? They are going to have knowledge. We know that insurance changes state to state. And so that social worker will have that knowledge of what might need to happen, what could change, what that looks like. And then, of course, we also, like I said, always connect to the chapter. But of course, in this scenario, Zay specifically requested this. So we're going to connect him with his chapter and let him know who to reach out to. So a few years later, Zay reaches back out. He is experiencing major issues with his insurance coverage and does not know what to do. Okay. And so this is actually a pretty common thing where we have a patron reach back out later. Sometimes it's a few years later, sometimes it's a few months later, like Grandma Susie, might be a few days later. But want to highlight that that does happen. And so oftentimes what we'll do is if they are connected to their HTC, or are willing to be connected to an HTC, then we will highly recommend that they go talk to that HTC social worker. Again, that social worker will have knowledge about that state's insurance in ways that we in Handy might not have off the top of our head. Now, sometimes when we get these requests, people are not connected to their HTC or haven't been in many years. And so in that case, like I said, that institutional knowledge, I'm on a team where they really understand insurance, well, for the most part, in ways that I do not. I'm not going to say always, but sometimes we all get stumped. We do not know. And so that's when we share the love and we give it to our wonderful public policy department to help us navigate that. And so that's an example of when we really do refer internally. And sometimes that is us sending the needed information to someone on that department, and then them giving back to us and letting us know what the answer is. And sometimes it's that we have staff that are ready and willing and want to talk personally to that patron. And so in that case, we then give them their contact information and then they talk to them personally, which is really amazing. One more thing I want to point out with this scenario is that oddly enough, even though we're over the phone or over email, we do develop relationships with some of our patrons just because they reach out over years and years and years. That's something that's been really cool for me to see as a new member here. I've heard Jonathan and Angie mention like a first name of someone and they both know who they're talking about. I'm like, oh yeah, they reach out every year about this or about this. So do just want to recognize that because we do create that safe space, we are providing information. We do get to develop some relationships with our patrons, and that's really special, and we really, really enjoy that aspect. If you can go on to the next slide, please. So this scenario is about providers. So we do get providers who do reach out to us, and that can be social workers, PTs, all of the above. So in this scenario, it's a school social worker who has a student with von Willebrand disease on their caseload. And this social worker has no clue what it looks like to have a bleeding disorder or live with that or be a kiddo with that, all of the above. And so, of course, we're going to give them all the things, right? A lot of times when providers reach out, we know that oftentimes they are very, very busy people. And so it's generally over email. And so we especially try to just like give it all in one email. Here's everything you could possibly, not possibly need, but here's everything. From all these different perspectives, especially with a social worker. And that's because a lot of times social workers are kind of the hub of information and are then disseminating information out. And so, Fiona, if you'll click one more time for me. And so we really wanted to show you all what that looks like. So even though our contact is with one social worker, this is another reason why our RFI number will never be completely accurate. We will put down that one social worker reached out, right? But what we know is that oftentimes that social worker is the source of information for multiple people within that school, within that HTC, within wherever, right? And so even though we only give that social worker some things, we always send them general links as well. So, right, they're going to have the link to find all the MASAC documents so that if they want to give a MASAC document to the school nurse, to the health teacher, to whoever, if they want to give education publications and brochures and things to the teacher, to other school personnel, they have that ready to go. And so we really wanted to demonstrate that while we're talking to one person, we oftentimes, there's no way to track where that information is going to fully support that student, that kiddo, that family. And that while our sheet, our little tracking sheet, it looks like it's just one, but in reality, it could be 5 or 6. And so that's a good example of a provider scenario. If you want to move to the next slide for me. So our last set of scenarios is international. So I know that we are the National Bleeding Disorder Foundation. We do not cover internationally. But however, we do get a lot of requests from people in other countries. And so we do not ignore those people, right? We do our best to connect them with resources, even though that is not what NBDF does, right? And so a very common scenario is multiple family members of the same family who all have bleeding disorders reaching out multiple times on behalf of their family and are just seeking better access to treatment or better treatment period. And so I want to acknowledge that those scenarios are not straightforward because it all depends on what country they're in. And so in this graphic, you'll see that that in this scenario, there's an HTC that they can access. There is a forgot what that stands for. There we go. National Member Organization of the World Federation of Hemophilia that they can reach out to. And then, of course, WFH as well. And then Save One Life is another organization that we often share with families. In this scenario, this family has that in their country. They have an HTC, they have an NMO that they can access. And I want to also just highlight WFH. They have amazing directories. They have a Global Treatment Center directory. That's how we're able to find the HTC and connect them. That's how we're able to find that in NMO is all because WFH. And that's really the biggest reason we're able to provide those resources. But unfortunately, that's not always how it looks. Fiona, will you click one more time for me? So unfortunately, there are countries where there is not an HTC, there is not an NMO. And so we wanted to highlight that sometimes this is what requests look like. It looks like not a whole lot that we can refer to. And this is why it's really, really important, all the international work that WFH is doing. It's incredibly impactful and incredibly important. And a lot of the work that NBDF is also doing internationally with those partnerships and things. It's to help with situations like this. So we did want to put up there, even though we're not international, we're national, we do get these requests and we provide what we can. And I am now going to hand it back over to Jonathan.
Thank you, Anna. That was awesome. So yeah, in this section, we kind of want to get into how Handy has been proactive. Up to this point, it's mostly reactive, and that's kind of been our bread and butter, responding to those requests. And it still is in a lot of ways. However, we try to create and share resources and additional content that is informed by certain things. So these are some of the ways that we are more proactive. So we keep close tabs on the bleeding disorders news cycle to see what's important, what we need to be reporting on. We also look very closely at RFI topic trends. So we look for those like critical mass requests where we're just seeing a heavy concentration in certain topics. And we create some resources and referral resources based on those. And we'll get into what that looks like specifically soon. And also we've been keeping a close eye on analytics from our website, pertinent sections, not the entire website, but for instance, bleeding disorders A to Z, the financial assistance programs pages, and the healthcare professionals, particularly education and resources, because we really want to see, we were really making an effort to be more intentional about the kind of information we share and follow those trends and see where it takes us. And we can go to the next slide, Fiona. Thank you. So one example of that, Handy writes the medical and the industry news that reaches your feed. So you can see on the left here, it's kind of a snapshot of some of the topics we've reported on this spring. These are just a few. We post at a pretty good clip, but you can see it's pretty much runs the gamut. So, but in broad strokes, I can say we report on updates on FDA approved and emerging therapies, current published research, new and updated medical recommendations from our Medical and Scientific Advisory Council, new educational opportunities for our providers. Our providers are super busy, so if we can keep them informed on education that's coming down the pike, we're happy to do that. clinical trial updates, and community resources. So like I said, we're keeping close tabs on the news cycle, and whenever we find something that we think is relevant, we try to turn it around very quickly and get that information posted. I want to acknowledge the work of our communications department, because while we write, we produce a lot of this content, they get it out there very quickly and make sure it's on social, and this content goes into our newsletter and other places. So they're amazing, and we really appreciate their being partners in keeping the community informed here. So Fiona, we could jump ahead. We've also gotten into creating fact sheets. It's something Handy did at one time, and it had been a little while, and we're kind of diving back into the world of fact sheets. We feel like it's such a simple, it's kind of low-hanging fruit when it comes to resources that can be generated that don't cost a lot, but can be super helpful, particularly in certain scenarios. So we kind of consider these introductory resources, that can serve different purposes and audiences, such as individuals and family members that are new to bleeding disorders, to educate personnel at schools or childcare organizations, and assist in outreach efforts by chapters in local communities. So we created the hemophilia fact sheet, back to basics, back in March for Hemophilia Awareness Month. So that is currently available. We'll be working on a von Willebrand disease fact sheet and a factor 11 deficiency fact sheet. Factor 11 actually is a good example of a condition that it is a rare disorder, but we receive more of the rare disorders. I feel like we receive more. In fact, actually, I know we've received more in for factor 11. So it's a common, uncommon bleeding disorder, and we're going to be really excited to get that fact sheet out. Okay, Fiona. Yeah, so a few years ago, we started this series where we would write synopses of select articles in peer-reviewed journals. So we started this because we thought, there are folks out there who don't have the time or the inclination to read a 15, 20, 25-page review article or research article. Not that those have great value, but sometimes people simply don't have the time. So we started writing these summaries and posting them. So, we do some research. We stick to reviews more often because usually they have broader applicability. So we cover things like von Willebrand disease, physical therapy, rare factor deficiencies and platelet disorders, cardiovascular disease, shared decision-making is a very hot topic, psychosocial issues, gene therapy, and women and girls with the propensity to menstruate, and issues related to screening and diagnosis. So you can see on the left side here some examples of some posts that we've done recently. We also just posted something on neurodevelopment in hemophilia, so definitely check that one out. And we'll keep them coming. You can find them if you go to the news section and filter for peer-reviewed journal summaries. But again, we also post these. Communications helps us post these in on social and in NBDF notes as well. Okay, and I'll kick it back to Anna.
My turn. So we have community resources. They really fall in about 3 buckets. We already talked about those financial assistance programs. We also have academic scholarships that are on the website as well. All of those except one are outside of NBDF. So it's very similar to the financial assistance programs. It's just a list that we compile and update annually so that our community is able to find those in one place. There is one scholarship, the Kevin Child Scholarship, that is processed through NBDF. And so that one is at the very top if you want to go check it out. But that one is through the organization. And then we also have our frequently asked questions, our FAQs, which I'm going to get into more detail on the next slide. So Jonathan has mentioned, I think I've mentioned many, many times that what we do is truly informed by our RFIs, our requests. And our FAQs is a perfect example. So this was launched in 2022. It is informed by actual questions that are posed by our Handy patrons, and they reflect a huge variety of topics. And actually, I think almost every single one of my request scenarios that I shared is reflected in the FAQs. And so for anyone who has these questions and just gets on the website, they're able to go ahead and find where to start with those questions already without having to call us, without having to send an email or submit an RFI and wait for a response. The wait time isn't long, but we know, right, having that instant information right then and there is handy. um, so really what it is, it's just a way to link visitors to all those resources. And we do update those fairly regularly. As we see more and more trends, we try to make sure our FAQs reflect what we're seeing in the RFIs. If you're gonna move ahead for us. So Handy Highlights, this is our newest, I would say, our newest kind of proactive resource that we've started. This launched actually this last March, and it's just a monthly communication that's really designed to connect our community with practical, timely, and accessible resources right then and there on a one-pager. And so we just pick a topic every month and we provide resources. So it's really a cool way for us to, we've had all these resources in our heads and we've been giving them out to individuals and our patrons in our RFIs. And so really the Handy Highlights is a way for us to break those down by topics and get those where they're readily accessible to the community. So topics we've already covered is financial resources, mental health resources, as well as joint health. And our upcoming topics have a wide range. We're going to cover pain and pain management, health equity, diversity and inclusion, von Willebrand disease. You can see the list up there. And you can actually find these on the NBDF publication page. I did put an image so you can see what it looks like. And but check those out every month. Our June one is already up and you can check it out. It's about joint health, and it's not just, these Handy Highlights are not just for consumers, they're also for providers. And so this last one in particular was geared toward physical therapists and providers in general, and people with bleeding disorders. So those are not just for consumers, they're for everybody. The next slide, please. So how can you stay connected with us? Because we're so much fun. So you can visit the Handy homepage. The link is right there. You can reach us either by email. There is on the website, there's a way to submit a request for information, an RFI on the website. We also have a phone number on there. And also check out our FAQs because there's a good chance that if you have a question, we've got the answer already right there, ready for you. And then, of course, we highly recommend subscribing to the email, to the newsletter, because you will get all kinds of updates on all the things that you would want to know. So research, treatment, medical advisories, advocacy, public policy updates, and community news and things like that. And last but certainly not least, we want you to check out the HemoWare magazine. The link is right there. That's probably the shortest link we have on our PowerPoint, so this might be easy to remember. And then, of course, Jonathan gave our communications team a huge shout out. And so follow us on social media because really, that's a really great way to stay on top of what's going on and to see what's happening. Otherwise, that's it.
Thank you very much, Anna and Jonathan. That was really very informative presentation, so many resources and really important information on how the community can access them. So thank you so much for that. We may have a time for just a couple of questions, but before we get to that, I would like to just draw everyone's attention to the chat. If you look into the bottom portion of your Zoom window, you should see an icon for the chat. And if you click on that, you should see a message from me with a link to the Handy website. So if you want to maybe take a moment to grab that link, copy it, save it somewhere else, then you can access all those resources after this webinar ends. And for those who are with us on the LinkedIn event, I will pop that link into the LinkedIn comments just after this webinar ends. So we do have just a couple of minutes for questions. So I will go ahead with one that I think I really want to be sure we do get to, which is to ask whether any of your resources are available in languages other than English and how people can access those if there are some.
So yes, or do you want to go? Or no, okay. Yes, we definitely have I think Anna might have mentioned it briefly, but our educational publications, not all, but several are available in Spanish. We are looking to, we may be cooperating or working with our colleagues over in education, get some of our, because they have a lot of experience with translation, getting our fact sheets translated into Spanish. You know, and they work with great translators that also, because one thing we worry about sometimes with some of our content is the medical jargon, not medical jargon, but some of the medical references. So just being careful when the translations are done properly. But otherwise, yeah, you know, we have a ways to go. We would love to have, I mean, like WFH, you know, have, you know, be able to toggle and to, you know, have information in Arabic and many other languages, French, Arabic, Spanish, and you know, Tagalog. But we're not quite there yet, but yes, we're aware of it, and we're working on it. And I think the fact sheets will be where we'll start, at least in our, you know, in our arena. So yes.
Great. Well, that's great to hear. Yeah.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
yes, I totally hear what you're saying, having worked in the translation of educational materials with the WFH, the importance of having those translations reviewed by people with language knowledge and the medical knowledge. It's so essential, and it is a little complex, but it's so worth it. So yeah, kudos for also taking the time and the effort to do it right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Couple of other quick questions for you. I noticed that you said you've got some of your RFIs coming in from HTCs. Some are coming maybe from people who are interacting with the healthcare system, looking for, you know, potentially seeking a diagnosis, in the process of getting a diagnosis. And you also mentioned some coming in from the general public. And I think that NBDF is very aware that there are people with bleeding disorders who are not necessarily connected to the traditional networks, such as HTCs and patient organizations. And it sounds like you are hearing from some of them. And just curious to know a little bit more about that, and whether there's anything you can think about that would, you know, help to increase that reach, because I know that's somewhere that a number of organizations are thinking about. How do we reach people that we're not reaching?
Yep. Yeah, it's something we're definitely aware of. And one way I was talking about content before, and content online, and getting better with our making sure folks find us very easily, folks that are not in the know. So you know, we're always striving, and again, we're back to communications, but striving that make sure that when someone searches, you know, they have maybe a bleeding symptom or something kind of tangential, and they run a search on Google, that we come up on that first page, because if you're not on this first page, likely they're not going to find us. So we work on our analytics and making sure that we're coming up high when people do even searches, like I said, that are kind of outside the periphery. So that involves SEO and other things of that nature. So that's one way. You know, we're kind of past the time where folks would just, you know, walk into our office. I mean, we technically have an office space, but you know, we did have walk-ins back in the day, you know, and then, you know, folks were in town and you know, found out, you know, where our headquarters were, and would stop in, and we'd be able to share, you know, give them a quick you know, sense of you know, what we're about. But I would say that, and I don't know, I'm sure education, folks in education are working on outreach as well. But yeah, it's a work in progress, because, you know, we're trying to encompass not just bleeding disorders, but you know, you know, other rare bleeding disorders, platelet disorders. So, you know, we want to be big tent. And you know, it's basically a work in progress. I don't know if you had anything to add, Anna, to that, but that's it.
Just super quick. I think something else that we've seen a lot in our requests of people who are not connected, it's a lot of those who are experiencing aging with their bleeding disorder now. So they've only accessed treatment during a bleed. And so things have changed a lot since they went, or their doctor retired, or things like that. So we've also found that the landscape just changed and they weren't aware of it. So a lot of it's also that we see a lot.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. We've had a question just come in, and I know we're at 3 o'clock, but I'd really like us maybe to answer this question if we can. Do you have any materials or one-sheeters for trans people?
I don't think we do, but that is something that I think our HEDI department is probably working on. I know we don't have our colleagues from that department on the call right now, but I know they're making a concerted effort to, incorporate those populations. So I'm feeling like something like that is coming. So
if
that's why
someone were to get in touch maybe with a specific question, would you maybe be able to help them find some resources, that are related, maybe
yeah, absolutely.
presentations from
Yes.
a bleeding disorders conference or other resources that are out there?
Yes, and it is something that is definitely being highlighted and worked on. And so, but it's kind of one of those things, yeah, where if you reach out individually, we definitely can connect people. But more general information, as far as I'm aware, we don't have currently at
Just
this
a little
time.
one pager at this point. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. But they can still be in touch if they want some
Yes.
specific
they
information.
should absolutely
Definitely.
get in touch because
Yes.
we need to hear from those folks. Absolutely. And
Mhm.
the heading department would love to hear from them as well. So
Mhm.
yeah, absolutely reach out.
All right. Well, I've run a little over time. Sorry to cut the discussion short. I personally have so many more questions, but we'll just have to draw a line there, I guess. Thank you very much, Anna Laurent and Jonathan Arangola from the NBDF Medical Programs and Information team for sharing your time and your expertise with us this afternoon. And I'd like to thank everyone in our audience for joining us. This recorded webinar will be available on the NBDF website shortly after the webinar. Please note that that website has changed from hemophilia.org to bleeding.org. You can also find there under the events tabs both past recordings of Wednesday webinars and the list of upcoming webinars. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Have an excellent week.